became such a self-fulfilling prophecy that well-adjusted, secure, and good-humored female characterization was seen as an appealing but improbable alternative to reality. From the roots of fin de siècle culture grew the stereotype of female emotional and mental development that we would encounter again and again throughout cinematic history. The weak, swooning girls of the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari and the Universal monster shows, the masochistic death wish of Louise Brooks in Pandora's Box, the crippling paranoia of Hitchcock's Rebecca and her counterpart in The Horrible Dr. Hitchcock, the desperate loneliness of Carrie and May, and conversely the demented bonds of the girls in Don't Deliver Us from Evil and Three Women, the repression of Mademoiselle and Lizard in a Woman's Skin, the dangerous obsessiveness of trance, the hysteria of possession. Unlike her comparatively lauded male counterpart, the eccentric, the female neurotic lives a shamed existence. But the shame itself is a trap, one that is fiercely protected by men and women alike. The feminist movement's fervor waned in the late 1970s and 1980s as individual excess and consumerism replaced any strong sense of female solidarity. Like any organized movement, women's lib ignored the tendency toward individualism and free thought. Where the militancy of the feminist movement was to some extent accepted and necessary in the 1960s, the social advances it facilitated were taken for granted by the 1980s, and fewer women felt compelled to vigorously tout its banner. The movement seemed stunted, and as it struggled to regain its cultural foothold, literature and cinema, particularly pornography and genre cinema, started to come under attack. Female genre fans were guilt-tripped into feeling like traitors to the cause, and it seems that much feminist horror theory was born out of the need for a defensive response. Just as the women's lib movement originated among women in higher education, it was within this milieu that new concepts of femininity, and how they related to horror and exploitation cinema, started to percolate by the end of the 1980s. Admittedly, hyperbolic responses to the emancipated woman were ever present in early 1970s horror, and men's fears either materialized as murderous, lust-filled females or found relief in the reinforcement of pre-existing woman as helpless victim stereotypes. But just as men struggled to adapt to this practical exercise in equality of the sexes, so did women, many of whom were opposed to the feminist movement from the outset, or were at least comfortable enough in their existing lifestyles to find it a distinct threat. After all, feminism was critical of them. It accused them of being complacent, mindless, dependent upon men for both money and self-worth. It saw them as weak and shameful. When I first started edging into film writing in the mid-90s, I was all about girl power. How horror films, even slasher films, were empowering to women. How most horror films were about men's anxieties concerning the nature of femininity and female sexuality. Gender relations, castration anxiety, all this great, meaty stuff. I saw positive female representation in everything, no matter how ostensibly reprehensible the film's politics. For a female horror or exploitation film fan, that's a great place to start. Certainly much more productive than denouncing the genre altogether as some counter-revolutionary, misogynist exercise in populist entertainment. But I often found myself generalizing, and the brevity of magazine articles allows for that, even encourages it. I wanted to explore neurotic characterization as comprehensively as I could, but I also didn't want to write a dense book of horror theory, as my interest in academic writing has diminished significantly over the years. I also knew that if I started leaning too much on Freud and Lacan, I'd be out of my depth. I needed to focus on what I know, namely that the films I watch align with my personal experience, in that every woman I have ever met in my entire life is completely crazy in one way or another. But whether or not that's a disparagement is part of what I aim to explore in this book. Naturally, my interests extend beyond conventional genre boundaries, but for the most part I'll be concentrating on horror and violent exploitation films. That said, exploitation cinema, like any other, does not exist in a vacuum, and there's been constant interplay and cross-pollination over the decades between legit cinema and genre cinema. Directors of pedigrees as varied as Roman Polanski and Andy Milligan have plumbed the depths of female neurosis because it's such fertile ground. You could say that the entire catalog of rape revenge films are descended from Bergman's The Virgin Spring.